Hey everybody, I think we are just about live. Just give us a couple more seconds to make sure that the video is coming through and all that good stuff. But hope everybody's having a good week so far. I'm having a pretty good week. It's my wife's birthday yesterday, as I was just telling Anthony before we got on here, so that's always fun. But this week, week number 2, is really the week where I guess things kind of start moving along. Last week was really awesome and really appreciate everyone's questions again. I thought it was like a ton of fun. I know Anthony felt the same way. So definitely want to keep like the good energy going, and especially into week 2, where we're really diving into like starting your business plan now and going through the foundations of it, like kind of the nuts and bolts of it and some of the really important parts of it, like the operations plan. I just wanted to give you a heads up before I turn it over to Anthony. And of course, I should put in this disclaimer too. If you have any questions, just like last week, even if there's something that maybe necessarily doesn't, because I mean, we're talking business planning this week, even if it doesn't pertain to that, feel free to ask it. We'll probably save it till like later in the class, just so you know. But if there's a question that's like pertinent to what Anthony's talking about this week, it might get answered sooner just because it kind of makes more sense with what we're talking about. But I just wanted to give you one heads up too. I know I sent through the email right before class and then on Friday with a whole bunch of different links to inside of it. One of those is the week 2 topics covered headline that you'll see in the middle of the email that I sent over. And one of the really important ones that I just wanted to call out was number 1 on there, which is the week 2 course materials. Inside of that specific module or chapter, you're going to find a few different things located on the right side of the membership platform. One of them is the Switch It Up business plan, which is Anthony's actual like business plan that he put together when he was starting his food truck. So that's really, really good. That's literally his exact business plan. So you can see what he's referencing to there and that sort of thing. In addition to that, we've got a template there. So if you don't, there's tons of templates that you can download for free off of Google, but there's one inside the Academy that you can just download if you haven't started yours already. And then finally, there's, I guess, the textbook material that Anthony has put together that really, really details some of the different sections of organizing that, which again is sort of like the textbook version of it. So Anthony will be covering that, of course, in more detail here, but I just wanted to call that out. That way everybody knows about it. But with that, Anthony, how you doing?
I'm doing awesome. Excited to be with everybody again. Also, I want to thank you guys for answering the questionnaire. For those of you who did it, if you haven't, it's still available in the link that in the email that Brett had mentioned sending out. Those answers will help us fine-tune the class to your needs as we go forward, and hopefully we can start with that this week. As Brett said, the template for a business plan is available to download in the Kajabi website, and I have to stress that it's not important what style you use for the business plan. What is important is that you have information that you've accumulated over time and that you've kind of organized in some way, shape, or form. I've seen people use like one-page business plan templates, which is a really good way to go about it. Even if you're going to a bank with this information, the most important thing that they'll want to see is the financial stuff. And so, it's not important that you have 15, 20, 30 pages worth of information. You'll find that my business plan is really long, and that is mostly because I had to write a really long business plan for a food truck or for a business plan competition. And it was specifically required that there be 20 pages. It turned out that with all the information that I had accumulated, 20 pages was pretty easy, but maybe you don't want to spend so much time talking about, how your management structure is going to be or where you're going to be vending. Maybe you can do that simply in a list. So the style of it's up to you, but we provided you with the business plan template just to get you started in case you don't want to deal with style issues. Another good way to go, which we've done in the past in previous courses, is to use a pitch deck. So a slideshow like PowerPoint or Google Slides, just to kind of put your quick thoughts on each slide and make it maybe 10, 15, 20 slides. It's totally up to you. But you definitely want to have something that kind of gets the gist of what you're thinking with the business plan and gets you kind of your business expectations out in the open. Helps you organize your ideas and your thoughts and makes it easier for you to kind of go from there. So this week...
oh, Anthony, sorry. I just want to butt in to make sure that our link is included. And let me add this link to the chat too, just so everybody has it. But within that same email, number 4, it looks like, is using a pitch deck as a business plan. If you guys want to check out some past pitch decks, we've got examples in there of some different things that people have done. And just so you know too, with your own thinking ahead of time, like the pitch deck basically like answers some of the really core questions, just like the biggest questions that the business plan answers, but allows you to do it in like a way faster fashion, as if you were like pitching someone in a presentation, right? Like if you had to do, tell me in 10 minutes what, how you're, what your food truck is, what you're going to be serving, how you plan to make money with it, where you're going to get funding, just boom, 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 all into a PowerPoint like that. And just keep this ahead for later too, because the last week when we take a look at, or when Anthony reviews everybody's business plan, even if you don't have, because a business plan might take you literally like a couple of months to put together, just put together the, the pitch deck instead, because it'll take way less time and it'll let you get your ideas out there. And then you can, send that over to Anthony for feedback, and he can then give you like some direct, like super, super specific, recommendations and feedback on your plan that you have based off that. I think that's really important. So Anthony, go ahead. Sorry, I don't mean to butt in.
No, that's a really good point. Thank you for that. And yeah, like Brett said, toward the end of the class, we'll be asking for your business plans or pitch decks or one-pagers, however you want to present the information. If you have questions we could get you feedback on, we'll be asking for it and then reviewing it. So so this week, I want to talk about the operations plan specifically. I kind of mentioned this last week, but you can look at the business plan, break it down into three basic pieces. You have the operations plan, which is your day-to-day stuff, and maybe some long-term goals about your business. The marketing plan, which consists of info about the industry and also how the public will view your business. And then there's the financial stuff, revenue, expenses, and startup costs. Those three are pretty much independent from each other, although obviously like all of those things fit together within the grand scheme of your business. Different parts of the business plan are more useful to different groups of people. So banks obviously care mostly about the financial stuff. You will probably have the most to say on the operation stuff. And if you really care about customer perception, which we all should, then the marketing section is where you're gonna like focus on that. But I expect that from our perspective now, since we're all kind of just getting started, that in the marketing section, you'll really want to talk about the things that you know about the industry in your area. So what other food trucks there are, how big the industry is, if there's a food truck co-op or membership group or something like that, how restaurants do in that area, so on and so forth. So these are all kinds of things that you can kind of gather about the food truck industry nationally, locally, and how that pertains to you. So with that said, this week I ask you to kind of focus on the operations plan of the business. We talked a little bit about this last week. I know a few people had questions about whether an LLC was the best way to go about it. That is the discussion of the legal form of business. We recommended that you guys just go to like something like LegalZoom. If you have the funds, obviously talk to a lawyer or and an accountant about that sort of thing. They'll help you. They'll be able to provide you the most accurate information. But it's kind of funny because in the grand scheme of like putting together a food truck, the legal form of business turns out to be like the most trivial aspect of the business plan. So I only mention it here in the operations plan, but you do not need to write like a page about how you're going to structure it and why, because it's pretty standard. You choose an LLC or an S Corp or a C Corp or sole proprietorship, which probably almost all of you will not be doing. I recommend an LLC because it's one of the easiest things to do, but types of business really depends on how you want to handle the accounting. And that's where you would want to talk to an accountant for. The second part of the operations plan, management team. Again, you don't have to spend too much time writing about this, but you do want to have some idea of your management structure. I know a few of you mentioned wanting to hire employees. So that would go in there, and you would say like you are the owner operator, or maybe you're just the owner and you're going to hire somebody to be like the on-site manager. That's another way of going about it. Some of you might have a partnership, so you and another person coming together, and each of you have your own focuses on what you're going to be handling in the business. You're going to do something like that. The management team section is a really good place to kind of break down that structure. In the case of myself, would switch it up. My brother focused on the kitchen aspect of it, and I focused on the marketing / putting together the operational aspect of it. And as each of us gain more experience in the other person's area, then at this point we're both able to kind of like switch in and out. So now I can do kitchen duties more independently than I was in the beginning, and he can do some of the other stuff independent of myself. And so those roles are allowed to change, but in the beginning you want to at least have a good idea of what the structure is going to look like. And so it's a good idea to put that in there. One other thing that you'll notice specifically in my business plan, and as soon as we mention it here, this always happens, but you'll see a section where we had, specifically for Split It Up, we had like an advisory group designed. And it was basically people that were familiar with the industry and in business in general that I can lean on, or that we could lean on, who could provide us advice for how to go about operating the business in certain situations, for certain days, so on and so forth. That may be a good thing for you guys. If it doesn't fit, don't worry about it. It's definitely not a necessity. I kind of wrote it into the business plan, again, because it was part of a competition, and I wanted to give the strongest possible case. We almost never needed to use the advisory team that we had put together. But knowing that those people were willing to support us in case we ever had questions was great. In the past, people have requested that Brett and or I would be part of their advisory group. And if any of you are wanting to do that sort of thing, I'm happy to contribute however way, shape, or form. Obviously, this class is a big portion of that advisory group. So even if you never talk to us again, which I hope is not the case, that you can certainly use us in that capacity in your business plan. Moving beyond the management team section of it, you'll want to spend most of the operations plan talking about your weekly or your day-to-day operations. This includes like what your food concept is, the type of food you're going to be serving, and how you're going to be presenting it. So from this point on, you want to really think about your branding, and you don't have to worry about the social media aspect of it now. And maybe you don't even need to think about the logo, but you certainly want to think about, what kind of food you're going to be selling and what's the message that you're going to associate that with. So for instance, Switch It Up, we were doing handmade gourmet peanut butter and jelly sandwiches, and we wanted to have that come through in every facet of the business plan. So when we were talking about food sources, we were talking about getting things locally in whatever possible ways we would get it organically. We always wanted to stress that it was always handmade, scratch made in-house. And so you can kind of see there that the food concept should be the first and foremost thing. You can then talk about your vending locations. And this is where you'll want to spend some time kind of digging this out. And it's also really good to, either talk to your fellow food trucks in your local area, or even better is just stalk them all on social media. Facebook's probably the best bet to find where they're located on any given day, and you can kind of like map out their locations and times. In some cities, I know you can use Roaming Hunger to kind of track where the food trucks are. I don't think this is, Brett, correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't think it's available in every market, right?
Yeah, most of the bigger ones, especially like on the coast. You're on the west coast, Roaming Hunger is really popular. Seems like if it's on the East Coast, it's a little bit less effective.
Okay. Yeah, but you can use social media in most cases, but Roaming Hunger has like an automated tracking system. So you'll definitely want to track where other people are vending. And if you happen to know any secret spots where there's like a lot of people, that's kind of your like market niche at this point that you can throw into the business plan. You definitely want to include in your day-to-day operations your menu pricing and coupling that with your cost of goods. And I guess adding a third thing into that mix is your food sources. So like where you're buying the stuff, how much does it then cost, where you're getting it from, and then how does that affect your menu price? And you don't need to have the entire conversation for menu pricing, because we're also going to talk about that when we get to the marketing stuff. But just showing that, you know, the cost of goods is correlating to this price, just to show that there's a connection there, and it's not just your price just doesn't come out of nowhere. You also want to talk about the services that your truck is going to need to operate. Where you're going to get your propane from, if you're using propane, gas for your generator and for your vehicle, if you're going that route, commissary, and other regulatory type permits. So that will also go into your weekly day-to-day operations, because that also will affect your timeline. If you're saying that, you know, we're going to serve from, you know, 11 to 2, and then again from 5 to 9, what happens in those between hours, you might think is some dead time, but then you'll find out you have to go refill the truck, you have to go get some more supplies from the store, so on and so forth. So you want to kind of give yourself a timeline. And that's actually a really good thing to also include in your day-to-day operations. And then as far as anything else that goes into your day-to-day operations, just think about all the things that you possibly would do in an operational standpoint on the truck or in the commissary. And like I said a little earlier, figuring out a timeline that you do all this stuff in will really help you kind of fill in all the gaps. And that's pretty much it for the operations plan. And I think next week we start talking about the next part of it. So I'll just leave it at that for now.
Amanda asks, so I'm from a very small area in Arkansas, so how do I track other food trucks? Because I don't see any in our area, not seeing any in, you know, not sure if not seeing any in my area is a good thing or a bad thing.
If you can't find them on Facebook, if you don't know of any, it's not necessarily a bad thing. You could be a first mover in the space. For instance, the town that I grew up in Beacon, New York, didn't have food trucks until about 3 years ago. And I only know this because my mom still lives out there, and she was telling me about it, and she was trying to get us to come out there. But the city had made it challenging for food trucks to operate, but they did set aside specific locations that food trucks could operate in, and one of them is like a really populated area near a park along the Hudson River. So the year that they were opening up that area of food trucks, you know, there had never been food trucks in Beacon before that moment. And the first year they were like limiting it to like 4 trucks or something like that. So, you know, this could be an opportunity for you to get in with like your city government or your county government or whatever, and figure out places that work for you that are not affecting how the county runs businesses and tracks businesses and all that stuff. That way you're putting yourself in the best case scenario to succeed. So I would definitely consider looking at that if you can't just go out and find food trucks. There might be a reason behind it, and your government offices will probably be the first place to start. Also, if you know anybody in like the small business associations in your area, they'll be good to talk to about, you know, why you don't see any food trucks.
One thing that I think too, Anthony, that would be good for you to unpack a little bit is just the day-to-day operations part. Like how do you go about putting together like your monthly operations plan? Like how much, especially when you're starting out, do you think is like a feasible amount of time? Like days that you should go out? Like, how do you recommend like going out 5 days a week or only doing weekends at first, and just like how much time, because say you do a dinner time, how much prep time does it take you? How much cleanup time, that sort of thing? Like how much time can people expect to kind of operate?
Yeah, so that I'm glad you said unpack it because there's a lot in there for sure. When you first start experience in the restaurant industry, even when you do, I know my brother had been in the restaurant industry for like 10 years prior to starting our food truck, and what was going to happen in the beginning is not how it unpacked at all. Like we thought that he was very used to, having a plan, going in the kitchen, and he knew exactly what to prep and he knew how much time it would take. But the logistics of like going to get the truck, moving the truck to the commissary, getting all the supplies from the grocery store to the commissary, doing all the prep at the commissary, packing up the truck, moving the truck to the vending location, setting up, then vending for 2, 3, 4 hours, packing that up, clean up, moving it either back to the commissary or going to our next location, resupplying. Took much more time than we had expected. So I think in the beginning we were expecting it to be like roughly 10-hour days with that kind of timeline. And a good rule of thumb, like I said, was to put together a timeline. So we always had like a list of things that we needed to get done for prep, and then like how we would. And the first few months we would do. We kind of just had like a general timeline, but as soon as like once we got in the groove of things, we got much more efficient at this, and we were able to like cut some things out that were no longer necessary steps. So for instance, like once we got used to all the prep, we figured out what prep we could do on the truck and what we needed to do in a commissary, and figuring that out helped us save a lot of time. So what we were doing in like week 1 of the food truck was actually taking us like 16 hours a day to get done. And then, fast forward to the end of the first year, and now it's taking us, maybe our days are like 9 or 10 hours. And now we're at the point where we can kind of just like do all our prep while we're like in the middle of service. Like we do whatever prep we need to get started, and then prep for the next session will happen like in the downtimes of our service. So we can kind of save a lot of time there. So now we're at like 8-9 hour days. So I definitely encourage you to put together a timeline. Things to think about are, making sure that the food truck is stocked, not just with food, but also the gas you need to get from here to there. Making sure that the commissary is stocked with all the things that you need. Generator, you're probably going to have a generator on your food truck. So making sure that that's fully equipped with gas. And also picking out a good generator is a really crucial thing to think about, which I think we talk about next week when we get regulations. Don't ask me why those two things are connected. I assure you there is a reason why they're connected. But the one thing I say about the generator is like some generators will last for like 6 hours and some will go on gas for 10 hours. And so picking the right generator is what I mean by that. How much time do you need it to run for, and how much power do you want it to produce? So making sure that all these things are stocked, making sure that you don't have to go to the grocery store 5 times during the day and once during your shift is essential. Putting together like a list of all the stuff, just being well organized. And as you talk to food truck owners, as you figure out like, especially based on your own food concepts, you'll get a good idea of like what's needed to be done on any given day. But definitely expect for there to be an evolution of how much time it takes you to do all of this stuff. In the beginning, expect it to take at least 1 to 2 hours longer than you project. And as you get more efficient, you'll be able to cut time.
Cool. Corinne asks, how much time between the LLC and jumping into the actual starting a food truck as a business?
That depends on where you are in the process. You could essentially have like your whole business plan written, and you're sitting on a lot of cash and you just need to purchase the truck. So you could file the LLC now and then have a truck within like 2 or 3 months. In some cases, I've heard stories, and even in our case, we had the LLC about 9 months before we were able to get the truck going. I know in a few cases, people got their LLC or their business registration and then got their food truck, but then they realized that they had to make a few modifications to the truck after they received it. And so maybe it takes a little longer. Maybe they're not able to get going until a year and a half. So it really depends on the situation. And also like when you buy the truck, if you need to do any modifications on it, or if you're good to go right from the jump, and if you have to like wait for a truck to be built, that'll take some time. Or if you just have to like literally drive to the next state, pick up the truck and drive it back. When we bought our truck, we got it in the beginning of April, and our first day in operation was almost exactly 1 month after that part. So if you essentially like don't wait until the food truck is like in your hand to actually like start your LLC, it could be much sooner. But so it really depends on like how much time it takes for you to acquire the food truck. I would say that's like the number one cost, time prohibitive step.
Tyler asks, what type of food costs / labor costs do you project within your business plan?
So
variables in that one.
Yeah. So there's a lot of variables in that. For us, we based everything on like a 25 to 30% cost of goods for all of our menu items. And it depended on which menu item specifically. And you can look in the financials section to see specifically which menu item I had that costed more or less. But let's say the average was like 28%. And then the labor costs, we actually didn't project it like on a per sale basis. We basically just knew what the expense for labor was each month. And so for you, that would be like number of hours times the wage that you're going to pay somebody, and then what that expense is. And so we would basically try and say, how many sales do we need to cover all of these expenses and then still have a profit? And profit, I just want to add this caveat that profit and your salary do not need to be like tied together. You could include your salary in the expenses, and then profit is literally money that you can use either to supplement your salary or as something that you can tie back into the business. Maybe you want to have like a second food truck in 2 years, so you would save all of your profit to buy a second truck, or at least get capital for another truck. Or you want to upgrade your kitchen equipment. So think about tying these certain expenses into the expense portion and not thinking about it as profit. But initially, like when we first got started, we did a really low salary for each of us. It was something in the range of like $30,000, or roughly $15 an hour is what we were projecting. And that was literally just to get started with the business plan. So really think about like, what's the bare minimum that you want to make here, and try and work the numbers from that perspective.
This is kind of a related question on that too. That gets into, it's related to the food costs, but and it's also going to impact how much time that you spend on your truck each time. But when you're just getting started from a menu perspective, how many menu items would you recommend starting out with on your truck? And I know, what menu items you started out with, you've made a lot of changes from the beginning till now. but just like, what do you think would be like a good general range to stay in?
Yeah, and thanks for bringing this up too, because the menu items that you have should definitely go in your operations plan. And think about like how frequently you're going to change them, maybe seasonally. We change them seasonally and sometimes even more frequently than that. But as far as number of menu items, it kind of depends on what you're going to be serving. I would definitely encourage you all to start with a simpler menu as opposed to a more complicated one. So if you can, like 3 or 4 menu items, and as you get the hang of things on the truck working in a small space, increase it to more. Or, you know, if you're doing something like tacos, you can have a wide range of menu items because each thing on the menu is roughly all the same ingredients, and you change maybe 1 or 2 things from item to item. So you can give people the appearance that there's a lot more menu items. But even in that case, you know, start with a simpler menu just so you can get the hang of like how much space you need on the truck for all this stuff, how much time it takes to make all this stuff, and what you can accommodate. So like, for instance, we wanted to start with like a 4-item menu and also have the flexibility to offer people gluten-free if they had celiac, or make sure that people could like adjust the menu items for food allergies. As we got better at and more efficient, we were able to add more menu items while still maintaining that flexibility. But we wanted to make sure first that we could actually do what we were saying we wanted to do. So we started with a 3-item menu in the very beginning. And some days we have it up to like 8 items, but most of the time we keep it around 5.
Do you recommend other people kind of keeping it around there too? Obviously, less menu items, less complicated the supply chain needs to be, right?
Yeah, I've seen food trucks that have like 2 things and they don't do very well in sales. I've seen food trucks that have like 10 things. They also don't do very well in sales. I think a lot of people expect food trucks to have somewhere in the range of like 3 to 5 menu items. And I kind of think that 4 is the sweet spot. So if you can get 4 menu items that are like diverse enough to really catch people's attention, I think that's the perfect number. If you're doing like a big event and you just need to like have a high turnover, then you want to do less, maybe 2 or 3. And if you're kind of just doing a lunch day out at some like business park and you don't really need to worry about turnover so much because you're not doing like 3,000 sales, then you can kind of play with what you're going to have and go 5 or 6 menu items. But I definitely encourage you to do like as few as possible. And like I said, I think 4 is like the sweet spot.
Cool. Nicholas asks, can you be faulted or penalized for having a business for, let's say, the first year and you don't technically show any income? So, year 1, you're probably purchasing your truck, which is a huge expense, and, you're buying equipment and you're buying all these other things. What are your thoughts on that one?
Yeah, so I don't think you can be faulted or penalized. A lot of that stuff, if you have a decent accountant, will be written off essentially, and you won't have to pay anything in terms of taxes for that first year. Really, the government only really wants your money if you're making money. So like, obviously, like your state taxes are going to be based on gross receipts, so any sales you make. And so like Albuquerque, we file quarterly. You could choose monthly, but it's kind of annoying. So we file quarterly, and we basically just submit what our gross receipts for the quarter was. And if we didn't sell anything, then we don't get taxed on anything. So it nulls out. And then our accountant at the end of the year, even for like good years, will look at like how much gas we're spending and all the different expenses that we're having on the business, and then see what things can be deducted from like our actual profits to give us as good of a tax return. There's no return because we're a business. We're only paying out as much to get our payout as low as possible. So you can't really be penalized unless you're like embezzling money, I think. But even then, you have to like not be hiding your tracks. We didn't say any of that stuff just now.
Yeah. No, I think that's, I mean, I think that's pretty typical too for just about any type of business, that if your first year, you're probably not going to be turning a revenue. You know what I mean? So I think that's pretty standard for just about any business you could have.
Right.
So, okay, good question here from Doug. What is your experience in selecting suppliers? I'm trying to keep my menu small but unique, basically fresh cut fries with specialty salts, dips, other toppings, things like that. I plan to prepare and make everything on the truck. Therefore, I don't think and hope I don't need a commissary. However, do suppliers need to deliver to a commissary?
So going to the supplier question first, if you're buying from like Costco, you don't need to have a commissary. You can just go there and pick it up. And I think with their like business membership, you can just have them like collect all the things that you need, and then you just go pick it up right from their door. If you're doing like Sysco, major food provider, you can either pick it up at their warehouse or they can deliver it to your commissary. I remember talking to them a long time ago about whether they deliver to like houses, and I think like the salesman that we were specifically talking to said that. I'm not sure if that's like corporate policy though, so that might vary depending on who you talk to. So if you have a Sysco in your area and you want to use them, definitely talk with them about the kinds of services that they provide. And they turned out to be a little bit more expensive than we were willing to pay for specific food items that we needed. But the services that they offered were actually kind of outstanding. So I really wished that we were able to like afford the full breadth of like their services. So I highly encourage all of you to talk to Sysco or any of the major food providers. Otherwise, like you can find your local warehouse and just go there and pick up whatever you need. In selecting suppliers, definitely encourage like Costco, Sam's Club. They specifically Costco, I know, has like a pretty good quality of selection. The choices are limited, but the quality that you're getting for each like choice is really good. Definitely, if you have like the opportunity to like work with local farmers, I highly encourage that. And you can always work out deals with them. You know, like you want to buy a certain amount of stuff, or even like here in Albuquerque, a lot of the farmers that we work with will also accept trade. So sometimes we'll make them like, you know, treats, and they'll give us like some new stuff that they don't really know how to sell for free. So we get to experiment with that sort of stuff too. And also, you know, like working with local farmers not only builds a relationship with the farmers, but from a customer standpoint, they really appreciate like the local flavor essentially that they're getting from it. And you can kind of talk up the provider to the customer, and now you're building a relationship between the farm and the customer. And this is like going back to a question that we had last week about partnerships. So that's another good way that things sort of work out. And a final suggestion is like you could even go into like big chains like Walmart. I don't know if you guys have Kroger stores in your area. Like we have a Kroger subsidiary called Smith's out here. And through the food truck, I was actually able to talk to like the managers of a few of the Smiths, and they would give us deals for buying like large portions of their supply. So like we need a lot of apples all the time. So essentially we'd walk in there and like buy them out of this certain breed of apple. And the manager didn't care because he gets tracked. All his tracking stuff is based on like volume and not necessarily profit. So he would sell it to us like at cost plus a cent, because that was like the bare minimum they were allowed to sell it. So they were, you know, he would get like commended on moving this much product each week, and we would get the benefit of having like the cheapest price of apple like in the state. And you could talk to them for a lot of these sort of things. For like, if you need to just get like a few things, like for garnish, for instance, if you need cilantro, usually like a bunch or two is all you'll need for like 2 days worth of shifts, or depending on how many sales you're doing. So it doesn't make sense to kind of get these bargains on some of that stuff. But if you're buying like a lot of things in bulk, then definitely like Costco, but also like the grocery stores are a really good place to go for that stuff too. So like in your case, Doug, you're getting fresh cut fries. So you're probably going to be buying like a ton of potatoes. So definitely like look at the, and don't be afraid to comparison shop. You know, compare the price of, 50 pounds of potatoes at Costco to the price of 50 pounds of potatoes at like your local grocer, and talk to the manager and be like, hey, I can get this for this cheap over at Costco. Can you do better? Because I'd really like to bring my business here because you guys are like local.
Yeah, definitely ask any like, especially if you go through a grocery store, what they can do for you as a business. Like, just let them know that you're a business, you're a food truck, you're going to be buying a lot of stuff. I know there's some food truck owners that, a lot of these grocery stores, they're connected to gas stations now too. If you buy a certain amount of volume, then, you get a free tank of gas, that sort of thing. So it's worked out to save money, not just on the purchase side, but on the gas side too. So definitely worth asking about. The other one I would point out too, is if you happen to have Sam's Club near you too. I know that, and it's going to kind of depend on what you're ultimately serving, but Sam's Club, I know, will, or at least they used to, deliver to your door. So I know what one hot dog vendor was doing specifically is they have like just like Costco, like a business app. So what he would do is he had all these different suppliers, but he made it so that it's hot dogs, so it's a little bit different than maybe what you're serving. But he had it set up so that everything within his app had his regular purchases of, hot dog buns and hot dogs and, ketchup and mustard and that sort of thing. And you would just order it on his app and it would be delivered to him. So that was a huge, time savings of not having to go to the store to look it up and, adding a few hours onto your week every single time. So definitely look into that if your menu allows you to buy some of your routine purchases from there.
I did not know about that service. That's awesome.
Yeah. Hopefully, I'm sure some people have. I'm just not sure how Sam's Club, how popular. I know we have one near my house, but I know some people don't have Sam's Clubs near them. Okay. Oh, Kristen asks, will there be an opportunity to look at actual sales and operating costs from Switch It Up in more detail? Ideally, we could look into event breakdowns, highlighting sales expenses, service hours, etc. That would actually be pretty cool.
Yeah, we could certainly do that, especially as we get later in the course and we start talking about like expenses and costs and the financial stuff. I'm happy to share all of that real-time data.
Even. Actually, yeah, that would be really cool. Do you remember what week the events one is by chance?
I want to say week 5, maybe.
Okay.
There's a day that we talk like all about revenue streams, and so that fits in the best there.
Okay. Cool. Kirsten, that's a really good idea. I don't think anybody's ever asked about that before, but that would actually be really, really, really helpful. Cool. Yeah, we'll add that to week 5, and make sure to call us out on it if we forget, Kirsten, because I think that's a really good one to walk through.
Yeah. In week 5, we definitely talk about the revenue streams, and if you make sure you have like specific questions, and I'll definitely talk all about like specific events that we've been to and sales that we've done and all that stuff.
Awesome. Okay. Thomas S., what are your feelings regarding debit card sales on a truck? I feel it gives more options to customers. Is it hard to do and get set up?
It is super easy nowadays, especially if you have self-service. There's a bunch of companies now that have like started to invade the space. I think like the first mover was Square in that regard. It was just a simple app and you get this little card reader. Almost every food truck nowadays has one, but I know like PayPal offers something competitive. And there was another one that was like Square. I can't remember the name of it now though. And if you go into the bonus materials in the class website, there's a thing on point of sale system where it goes into like the different options that you can get with that regard. And I talk a lot about Square because that's the one that I used on the truck. The fee for it is something like 2.75% of your revenue, which is kind of insignificant. I mean, you do $100 in sales and they take out $2.75. So it makes it, I feel like it makes it really affordable to do credit card sales. If you're doing like high volume credit card sales or debit card sales, you know, something in the range of like thousands of sales a day or 1,000 sales a day, then it might make sense to go with like a larger company, because then they're not taking a percentage. They just want like a specific dollar amount that they want. And when you're doing that many sales, then it works out to a much more insignificant percentage. But certainly having like the mobile reader is a very easy option. And one other thing about that was, I remember we were at an event and there were so many people there. There was like 50,000 people there that the cell service wasn't working. So I had to like shut off the cell service of my phone, and the Square app like saved every transaction that we had done. This is like a really big gamble, but I had to do something, otherwise we weren't going to get paid. So Square like saved every transaction that we were going to do. And then like later after we left the event, it was like 2 in the morning. I turned it back on when I had like full strength cell service, and it just like processed all of those statements simultaneously at like, you know, 3 in the morning or whatever. And so I was able to like, one, make sure that our transactions then happened quickly, because one, like the ATM machine was down and all the other food trucks that were at the event also couldn't collect anything other than cash. So people were frustrated. So the fact that we were like the only truck that was able to accept cards still helped us. And also like doing it, you know, later also saved us time, because now it would just swipe and it wouldn't have to like send the data for each transaction. So that kind of worked out. But you know, that's the benefit of having the mobile thing, is that you can be anywhere and accept credit card stubs. You don't have to be like hardline plugged into like an old school phone jack.
John asks, your income, or StateSend asks, your income statement looks a bit intense. How did you figure out all those projections?
John, I totally understand. I remember the day that I was putting it together and I was just like overwhelmed with it myself. We will work on it as we go throughout this course. But specifically, I think it's like week 7. It's one of the last weeks. I will walk you through step by step every part of putting that thing together. If you want to get started on it early, then I would say this quickly. You split like your normal, you know, document into 2 spreadsheets, and the first one, just do like all the things that you expect to buy to get started before day 1, and then the second one is everything that happens after day 1. And so as you start learning more about the things that you need as far as like income goes and what your expenses are going to be, just start adding them to both documents. So that's how I started. I just started taking things. So like I knew I needed to buy cleaning supplies, so I listed all the cleaning supplies. I knew I needed to buy certain groceries and supplies just to get food going for before day 1. So I put all that stuff into the before day 1 document. And then I started thinking about all the different things that we needed to have going as far as like our month-to-month projections went. And so I just did a little bit at a time. And like, I know it feels really daunting, but the slower you go at it and the more time you give yourself, it becomes a little bit easier and a little bit easier. So just think about like, you know, a few things right now, like what kind of cleaning supplies you need to buy. Put that in there. You know, what kind of like, how much do you think gas is going to be per day? Multiply that by 30, put that in the month-to-month expenses. So just start thinking about these little things over time. And I'll add this one little bit of information, and that is, it doesn't have to be perfect, because, you know, prices will fluctuate over time. I remember that when we got started, we specifically thought that our prices were going to be like $5 per sandwich, and that we were going to do like 100 sales a day. It turned out that we were doing something like 50 sales a day, but that people were spending on average $10 a sale. So like the numbers worked out to the same like income, but the numbers were off. They were like inverted from each other. So knowing that, we just took like our time, being comfortable with evolving the financial projections. So think about it that way, take your time, and we'll come back to this in week 7.
So, sort of on that same topic, what sort of sales volume would you expect early on? Like when you put in those estimates into your figures, like what's a good conservative number that you could put in to estimate every time you go out? And then like what were the sales like at your truck right away, like within the first month?
Yeah, so the first month was kind of weird for us because there was like some days where we weren't vending when we would like to have been. Like we were trying to project vending 5 days a week, but we ended up not vending 5 days a week. So like the first month we were averaging like 3.5 days or something like that. So kind of think about, how many days a week you want to be vending, and then think about that over the full course of the month. So I think in our case, we were projecting 20 service days, consisting of lunch and dinner. So basically 40 opportunities of vending. And then we kind of tried to figure that out in across the calendar. Then we knew we wanted to do, we were hoping for 100 sales a day. That's kind of what we were thinking of averaging. But I think the better thing to think about is how much money do you need per day to survive for the month, like to cover all of your expenses. And so with that, I think $500 per day is kind of where you want to be. It really depends on like what your expenses are locally. So, some places, the cost of goods for groceries is cheaper than the other. Like compare like LA to, Las Cruces, New Mexico, which is like the middle of nowhere. I expect like food cost in Las Cruces to be much lower than it is in LA. So, it depends on like what your expenses are. But if you guys are thinking for like a ballpark, try and start with like 500 and adjust that number depending on what you think, how many days you're going to be serving a month and how much your expenses are going to be. And obviously you always want your income to be greater than your expenses.
Cool. How did you start to promote your food truck when you just got it started out? Did you do any like free samples? How did you get people interested in your food in the first place? Amanda asks. Yeah,
so we did it kind of like in several steps. First, when we were writing the business plan for the business competition, we actually like went out to like a food truck park and like surveyed people. We were telling them like what we were planning on doing, and we gave them like a sample menu and asked them to like rate each of the menu items essentially. So we were kind of like gauging what people who are currently eating at food trucks want in a food truck. Then we did a crowdfunding campaign, and in the crowdfunding campaign, obviously like we're kind of soliciting people out in the world who may or may not know who we are to like buy into our food concept. So that was kind of like a marketing thing in itself. And we also like, for people who contributed to the campaign, we sent them like samples of like jellies that we were planning on making. And then like higher reward backers, we offered them to do like a private tasting or a private dinner, depending on what they wanted. And Brett, you know about the samples because you were the recipient of the first batch. And then
really good jelly.
And then as we got closer to the events, we did like one big marketing event before we launched. It was like 2 months before it was a month before we actually had a food truck, 2 months before we got started. And we just did this like chocolate and coffee fest. It was purely a marketing thing. It was like $300 just to be there. And we brought a whole bunch of like samples of the food that we were going to prepare. and we were just like sampling all day, giving out our business cards, and we had some packaged versions of like the spreads that we had, so we could sell those just to kind of like recoup the costs from being there. So it wasn't just a total loss. And then we did some advertising on social media just to kind of get the word out there, so that when we were ready by day one, you know, we could hit the road hard. Oh, and also we did get invited to do a few like radio appearances too, just to talk about it. So if you guys like, if you have like local radio or local news, if you can get a hold of them, and they're kind of pretty easy to get a hold of, definitely try and do some marketing and promotional stuff with them. They'll figure out the segment. Maybe you can do like a live cooking demo on the morning news channel or something like that. That's a really good way to get the word out.
Okay, here's a really good detailed question, and it's one that could get overlooked in the business planning portion. But the packaging of your food, do you include this into your food costs? If so, what percentage of food costs should be packaging? And you know, what's your opinion on really nice branded serving cones, food trays that maybe have your logo on it, but are obviously going to cost a little bit more to produce?
Yeah, so you definitely include packaging in your food costs. When we were pricing everything out, now we just do the math mentally now, so I don't even like know it exactly. I know like the rough estimate. It's like, it works out to like 5 cents for like, if you just want like generic like spoons, forks, napkins, paper boats, or like, you know, serving trays or cones or whatever. It's usually pretty cheap depending on what it is. Obviously, like the more expensive you go, the more it factors into it. So like, if you go to a food truck and they have like $15 menu items, and they give you this like really expensive like plastic container that your food comes in, you know that like a lot of the cost that you're paying for the food is actually in that container. So I'm kind of against like really fancy packaging, because, you know, people aren't paying like $50 a plate. Not that they shouldn't get that sort of packaging, but you want to give people as much bang for their buck as possible. And they're not going to a food truck because they want like the most extravagant fine dining experience. They kind of want like comfort food, down home stuff, and stuff that's like portable. So you don't want to like invest in stuff that they're just going to throw in the trash in like 5 minutes anyway. But that doesn't mean that you can't do it. So like sometimes you can get branded stuff for pretty cheap, and if you can do that, then that's awesome. A really good way to go is to like buy stickers. So we have this a good friend of ours / partner is this coffee truck called the Blunt Brothers Coffee, and they actually had like a custom made stamp. So they spent like maybe like $80 on the stamp, and they just like stamp it onto every one of their onto their cups. And they use good quality cups, but because it's not branded, it doesn't cost an arm and a leg for them to get. And then they just add the stamp on it, so they have their branding on it, and they have good quality utensils. You can do the stamp, or you could do stickers. Stickers are pretty easy to do, and they're also really cheap, like roughly like 1/2 cent or 1 cent per sticker, depending on how many you buy. So those are 2 inexpensive ways of achieving the same thing. And nowadays, that kind of aesthetic is like sort of like a trend. Like a cost-saving thing is also like aesthetically pleasing in this case. So I definitely encourage going that route if that's what if you want to have your branding on it. We chose not to do branding for our stuff, and I don't think it really hurt us or helped us in either case. But it can't hurt you to have the branding on stuff.
Yeah, that's a great point. I saw another food truck using that stamp on these like just plain square, I want to say almost like a bento box type thing. But yeah, before they put it out, they just put the stamp on, and those things are super cheap online to make.
Yeah.
Yeah, right now. So I think that's a really good way to go about it, and it won't take you a ton of time either. Let's see. Okay, Thomas, I'm not exactly sure what your question is. Do you have a router or the internet on your food truck, Anthony? I think that's the question.
Not on the food truck. No, we just use the self-service. But that's one of those things that you can include in like the expenses of the business. So like your self-service provider, instead of you paying it out of pocket, the business pays for it. So stuff like that and your home internet, because you do a lot of business at home, can be included on the expenses. That might help you save money on the out of your own pocket in the long run, especially in the beginning when you are kind of cash strapped as you try and like put all your effort into getting this business going.
Tony asks, is your truck still running this season? And if let's see, how many trucks do you have?
Only the one.
Let's see. What? Oh, one other thing too that I wanted to make sure you covered too, and I know we're at about an hour now, but the mission statement part of the business plan. How did you approach that? Do you feel like that's an important part of like the marketing of your unit?
The mission statement is, it's hard to define it. It's kind of insignificant, but it's also not insignificant. So like the mission statement essentially like permeates the whole business plan. It becomes like the one theme throughout. And it also, you kind of like adopt that philosophy as you get going. When I talked about this last week is like, if you're just in this to make money, then food truck is probably not the best way to go. It's better to, have like a philosophy, and you want to do business with this philosophy. So with that said, I would say like the mission statement, you basically just want to define as simply as possible, like in one sentence, what your business does and convey the philosophy of that business. So for instance, for us, it was, we wanted to convey that we were like scratch made food and enjoying it. I mean, people were able to enjoy our food. So that's kind of how we came up with our mission statement. You really want to convey what is going to be like the big selling point for you guys. So I definitely encourage you to do it and spend some time thinking about it. But it's, like as you develop your business plan, the mission statement could be like the last thing you do, because it's kind of one of the hardest things to succinctly say.
Is it possible to make a living on your on just one food truck?
Absolutely. It depends on like how many sales you're doing. Like if you're doing a lot of catering, especially, which is where we're at essentially, that's kind of where the big ticket is. You do like the day-to-day stuff to get noticed, and you could do like big events and make a lot of money. There's actually a few people in the class who essentially signed up to do only events. So if you're only doing like big ticket events, you can make all your money there. Catering is a big way to go, because like weddings, you can charge a lot, and also you are making a lot for the, like you're doing a lot of sales essentially in one sitting. So like a wedding, you're doing business. With a wedding, you're doing business to, like 100 sales for like 5 hours of work, and you're doing it all in like, in one shot. So, you can like stack those up and do those like 3 or 4 days a week and just do all your prep time to do all that. If you're going to do just like, If you're gonna do like just day-to-day, like lunch, dinner, service hours, it really depends on where you're gonna be. So you gotta kind of like use the beginning to kind of like set yourself up for the rest of the year. Make as many connections as possible, find all the best spots, and then do what you can to kind of sustain that and just get more efficient. And it is possible to make a living on just one truck.
Hard-hitting one from Tony. Houston or Dodgers, Anthony? What are you thinking?
Ugh.
World Series starting tonight. This is when you start watching Major League Baseball.
I guess I have to pick the Dodgers because the Yankees lost to Houston.
I guess I'll go Dodgers too. That's going to be my pick. What do you think, Tony? You probably know better than both of us. I don't know if you're a baseball guy, Anthony.
Not so much. Football and basketball.
Ninja Pig asks, when's the busiest time of the year for your truck? And then when is the slowest time of the year for you too? And do you operate year round? Like,
yeah, so we're
annual operations like?
We're year round. Busiest time is summer, slowest time is winter. The first year was the crucial moment because we kind of expected winter to be slowest. So we had to do like as much as possible in the summer and fall to kind of get us through the winter. Once you get through that first year, you know, like all the mistakes to avoid, all the best spots, all the right things to do, and you kind of coast from there on out. You're always looking for like advantages and stuff like that, but it's much easier the second year. So busiest time is going to be like spring, summer, fall. And for us here in Albuquerque, like middle of spring and middle of fall are like the busiest times, just because it's not like 200 degrees outside. Summertime is really busy. There's a lot of events and stuff like that. In the winter time, there's less events. Less people are going to be like walking around, but you'll still have a lot of catering opportunities. So if you can kind of like find as many catering gigs during the winter to do, then you'll be perfectly fine.
Cool. And Tony, go Dodgers. Hopefully there's not too many Astro fans on here. Okay, looks like we're at about an hour and 10 minutes. So I guess we'll try to wrap this one up. I know it went a little bit earlier last week, but just to look ahead to next week we're going to be covering the market analysis portion. So figuring out the food truck area in your neck of the woods, seeing what the competition is like, seeing who else is operating there. And then also going to be covering the fun topic of funding your food truck. And I know Anthony's had a lot of experience with a lot of different ways of generating funds needed to get a truck, from getting a loan to savings to crowdfunding to winning a business plan competition. So he's pretty much did it all to acquire his vehicle. So, so those will be the two main topics. And then, you know, as per the usual, right after sometime tomorrow, I'll send the replay out of this class, and then all the links to next week's materials outlined in an email, or else all the materials are inside the private membership area right now anyways, if you want to go check it out. But one more question though before we go from Corinne. Is it best to build a custom truck or find a used truck? And we do got some Astros fans on the call. Patriots, I don't know what that has to do with this conversation, but
I would say it's better to go with a custom built truck, but it really depends on the cost. So, you know, look at your budget, figure out what your budget's going to be for a truck, and then figure out if you can find a truck builder who's willing to like either buy used kitchen equipment with a new truck, or build it from a used truck with new kitchen equipment, or even used truck, used kitchen equipment. I think I talked about this last week, that a lot of used trucks online are, you know, they're built for the truck that was formerly in operation. And so you don't know what you're going to get with those. Like, I'm not saying that they're disreputable, but you know, you might not have the the kitchen that is there might not suit your needs. Maybe you have extra stuff. Maybe you don't have enough stuff. So definitely try and find a builder and at least use them as like information about like regulations and needs and all that stuff. And if you can find a used truck that's already built, you don't have to spend the time or effort waiting for a truck to be built, then go that route. But it really depends on what your budget is first and foremost.
And you got a truck that was used, correct?
Well, it was a used truck with used kitchen equipment, but we had it built to our special specifications.
Cool. Well, I guess thanks everybody for your time this week. Again, next week, same time, same channel. Send out. I'll make sure to send out the emails to the links for the updated class next week. But yeah, awesome time, awesome questions, and we'll see y'all next week. Go Patriots, Astros, or Dodgers. See you later.